All right, friends. So, welcome to our video on the Declaration of Independence. We are making the case for independence with the document that actually declares independence. So, let's get into it. How are you going to actually use this video? Well, first off, in Google Classroom is a worksheet. You are going to fill it out and follow along. It's a lot easier to understand these things if the text is right in front of you. So as you're watching the video, follow along with the worksheet. I'll print some copies as well if you want to use that. This is stuff that you're going to use for later. It's not just useful for the IA, but it is going to be useful for later. Make comments and notes in the worksheet itself, either in Google Classroom or on the paper copy, and start thinking about the bigger questions that this video is going to raise because those questions are not going to go away. Okay, let's dive into it some more. Here's the thing. We care about the Declaration of Independence for a lot of reasons. The Declaration of Independence is what we are celebrating on the 4th of July. Yeah, Independence Day, Declaration of Independence, Independence Day. The 4th of July is when the Declaration of Independence is signed on July 4th of 1776. It is first introduced on July 2nd, and then it is actually voted on and signed on the 4th of July. That's why we have the big fireworks. That's why we celebrate. That's why 4th of July is called America's birthday, because that's when we declared independence. So, already in that moment, it's important. But it's also representing a full breakup with Britain. We're going to keep using this metaphor of the breakup because it is useful for some sections of the Declaration. It's not just a breakup note, but there are parts that do kind of sound like a breakup note. We'll get into that. But the Declaration of Independence, more importantly, is a hugely foundational text in terms of our identity, what America actually is, what we stand for, what are we going for, what are our goals, what are our dreams. The Declaration of Independence will be called back over and over and over again. It is going to be referenced by many of the most important leaders in our history because it's important. It's hugely influential to our themes and to the ideas and to the very things that we talk about as a country, still to this day. So we need to make sure we understand it. We need to make sure we understand it in terms of what it helps sets up. Because yes, I have it over here. But we've been spending more time talking about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Not an accident. Those are very, very important documents. But the very principles encapsulated in those documents, you find those themes starting here in the Declaration of Independence, as early as 1776. But the ideas are percolating even before that. So we need to get into it. Okay. And look at it. The Declaration of Independence is hugely influential culturally. Okay. And just really important to our history. We are coming up next 4th of July is called the 250th birthday of America, the semi-quincentennial celebration. It's going to be a big, huge deal. And you're going to see all these 250 years. Oh, yay, cool. And you're going to see all this stuff. And you're going to see a lot of people quoting the Declaration of Independence. You're going to see it thrown all over the place because that is what happened 250 years ago next July. You're going to see it start. This John Trumbull painting. Okay. The room didn't look like that. The people didn't look like that. They didn't, I mean, they looked a little like that, but that's not what Independence Hall looks like, but it's iconic. This is what people remember. This is what people think about. Think about these founding fathers seated, talking and debating and deciding to do the heroic thing of declaring independence. You're going to have that actually happening in this building. It's called Independence Hall. It's in Philadelphia. You can go visit it. Okay, you can actually go get tickets once the shutdown's over and go and see the room that the Declaration of Independence was signed. But interestingly enough, another big thing happened in that same room just a few years later. Well, actually, 13 years later. No, yeah, 13. Nope, sorry, 11 years later. And that is the debating of the Constitution. The same room. That's not an accident. The framers of the Constitution wanted to ground the Constitution and the very debate of the Constitution in the ideas of the Declaration of Independence. Okay. We see these, and there's an iconic paragraph that we're going to talk about. And I have no doubt you've heard lines from this paragraph because people keep quoting it. Okay. It's a big deal. Okay. And we're going to talk a lot about it because there is a lot to it. Okay, you can actually go visit the Declaration of Independence. You can go visit the one of the original documents. They made several copies that day, but one of the original copies, which has the direct signatures of the people who signed it. Okay, you can go visit that in Washington, D.C. in the National Archives. So when the shutdown's over, hopefully the shutdown will get over soon, you could actually go see the Declaration of Independence. It is so iconic that they made a movie about a guy who tries to who steals the Declaration of Independence in order to save it. I d- It's convoluted, it's weird, it's a entertaining movie. The plot doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it's entertaining and fun. I would suggest watching it. You should be able to get it on Disney Plus, I think. But if you'll notice, and the movie's called National Treasure, okay, starring Nicolas Cage. And in the background of this poster, you see this text? That's the Declaration of Independence, folks. Yeah, it's iconic. So even for that, it is a really, really important thing, and it's important that we understand what it actually is. So let's dive in. As with everything, we got to make sure that we are building context. We are building what this is, where it comes from, what leads to it, all that happy, happy sourcing stuff. Okay. So it's heavily influenced by the events, the people involved, and the ideas that were talked about at the time. So let's start figuring that out. First off, the Declaration of Independence is going to repeatedly say he did this to us. He denied us these rights. He is a horrible, no good person, and we should break up with him. They don't say that line exactly, but that's the tone. Okay. The he in that setting is King George III. Okay, King George III was the King of England from 1760 to 1820. He's actually one of England's longest serving kings. Okay, he's a hugely influential person, and he's ruling England at a really big time for English history and world history. Okay, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, Napoleon, all that's happening while King George III is King of England. Okay, so it's a really big deal. He is not an absolutist because he does believe in the parliament. Okay. An absolutist would be against parliaments. He's not an absolutist, but what he is a mercantilist. He believes the whole point of a colony is to serve the mother country. And any benefit that the colony gets is as the grace of the mother country. Okay. So he might not be an absolutist in the terms of his own people, but how much is that different to if you're one of the colonists? He's treating you like he's an absolutist because he's not listening to your ideas. You are not represented in any way. He might as well just be an absolutist king. At least this is some of the arguments that you see the American leaders make. Okay. He is, there's going to be a lot of moments when the Declaration is going to bring him up and say the king directly or he. They're honestly talking about both him and the parliament. Okay. The Parliament's the one passing the Quartering Act and the Townshend Acts and the Stamp Act and all these things that the colonists really hate. And they're doing it, but they're doing it on behalf of King George. And so King George gets referred to in the document, but they're really talking about the whole of the British government. One thing about King George is an interesting fact. Okay. It is historians largely believe that that he was bipolar. Okay, he had a lot of moments of depression, hyperactivity, and he had there's a lot of theories as to what was going on, but he did have to take breaks from being king because of temporary madness. Okay, it's actually a really cool movie called The Madness of King George. Really well acted. It's from the early 90s. If you can find it, I don't know where it's streaming, but worth watching. Okay. Now, we can't talk about the Declaration of Independence without talking about Thomas Jefferson because Thomas Jefferson is the person that cloaks himself in the legacy of the Declaration of Independence. He is the person that you should think of. Okay, he's being a little full of himself, but he's right in this case. He did draft most of it. He did encapsulate its ideas. He is the person who comes up with most of what's in there, and whatever ends up getting the final version, the departures are things that where they subtracted parts of it. Okay, so the thrust, the ideas, the themes, it's coming out of Jefferson's head. So we got to understand Jefferson. So first off, one thing we got to understand Jefferson. Jefferson is rich. Okay. He is a rich Virginia planter elite. And when we talked about Bacon's Rebellion, we talked about what it means to be a planter elite. Yes, he absolutely owned slaves. Okay. He owned slaves. He often claims he hates the institution, but he definitely benefited from the institution. We're going to talk about that a little later, about what that kind of means. But it's important to understand that he was a rich planter elite in Virginia. The other thing, though, is that he's hugely educated. He benefits from his wealth by educating himself, and he is so grounded in the Enlightenment, heavily influenced by the Enlightenment. He refers to Enlightenment thinkers as some of the greatest humans that have ever lived. Okay, especially John Locke, Rousseau, Montesquieu. He had all these books in the library and he read them voraciously. He could quote them. Okay, he's heavily influenced by the Enlightenment. He rises to prominence through the colonial representative assembly for Virginia, which was the House of Burgesses. He runs for office, he gets elected, right? He becomes a pretty influential person, and it becomes known for being a really smart guy who's a great speaker and a great writer. And that gets him noticed. So when it comes time to elect some delegates from Virginia to the Second Continental Congress, they decide to send him as one of those people. Okay. He would eventually be picked to draft most of the Declaration of Independence. Okay. But the interesting fact, I don't know if I'd call it interesting, but the thing we do need to know about him, he fathers one white daughter with his wife, but his wife dies pretty early on. And so then he has a relationship, if you can call it that, with one of his enslaved Africans, Sally Hemings. He has at least six half-black children with Sally Hemings. Okay, we can't really think about Thomas Jefferson without thinking about that. It's a lot of historians are really rethinking how we talk about Jefferson because you can't really remove that from the equation. Okay? It's important. It came up at the time. It was important, and it was something that was used against him politically. That he has these children with Sally Hemings, and that he has this relationship with Sally Hemings, who is still enslaved while all that's happening. Okay. We'll talk about that more later. Some other supporting cast members that are important that are kind of happening in the background. We have John Adams over here. He becomes our second president, but before that, he is a major prominent leader and lawyer from Massachusetts. Okay. They actually end up best friends, Jefferson and Adams, best friends, and then they become political enemies. And then they become besties again towards the ends of their lives. And they die on the same day, crazy enough. Whatever. Benjamin Franklin. He's going to be the person that kind of helps push Jefferson. He makes some edits. He's a good politician at the time, but he's also known for being one of the prominent and most important leaders and an elder statesman for the newly emerging American Republic. And he is from Philadelphia. Okay. Another person, this dour looking fellow over here, that's Roger Sherman. He was on the committee that helps draft the Constitution, but he's not doing his big important thing yet. His big important thing happens with the Constitution, but he's still there. He's in the wings. He's waiting. And then this last person, Thomas Paine. You all dove into common sense and dove into what common sense meant, and all the Enlightenment ideals and common sense. But this is happening months. Common Sense was published months, like 4 months before the Declaration of Independence is debated and talked about. It's not an accident. Thomas Paine, while he wasn't there at that moment, he was definitely around in spirit. Okay. So the historical context. Let's actually look at the historical context. So go to your worksheet, and in that you will find ba, 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 here. this timeline. You see all these different things, like the Boston Massacre, Boston Tea Party, the Coercive Acts, First Continental Congress, right? All these moments of self-government and where the country is trying to get, is trying to decide what it wants to be. Does it want to be free from England, or does it just want England to actually try and give it some freedoms? That's the first goal. And you have blood getting spilled. In 1775, April of 1775 is a year before July 4th, 1776, but it's absolutely going to influence. Okay. This is the battles of Lexington and Concord, or where the British and the colonists actually start shooting at each other and killing each other. This grows even more for the Battle of Bunker Hill. That's going to have a huge impact on whether or not to declare independence, because if you're shooting at each other, that means the breakup might be something you need to do, because shooting at each other is quite toxic behavior in a relationship. So we also have this moment in July of 1775, a full year before signing the Declaration of Independence. The Continental Congress knows that this is getting bad, and they try one last shot. They go, look, they send this letter. It's called the Olive Branch Petition. Okay. They send this letter saying, let's try. We're loyal to you, but we need these oppressive policies to go away. And the king and the parliament reject it. They absolutely reject it. So there's been violence, full-on violence happening earlier in the year. In April through June, full violence, full shooting, but they try to make peace. The Americans try to make peace, and the king says, basically, screw you. We're going to send more troops, then you're going to have this. You're going to become fully obedient to my will, okay, to the British will. Okay, that rejection pushes these American leaders. We tried. We offered you peace, and you gave us that, right? They're going to start to say independence kind of sounds like a good idea. Okay, they're going to start thinking about that. Thomas Paine, by January of 1776, he's like, all right, guys, stop waxing poetic. Stop thinking about the Americans being a colony and the glory days of the colony. Those are done. Okay. You need to just declare independence. It makes sense. You all dove into common sense already. So, and common sense becomes really, really popular. It helps shifts that momentum publicly towards independence. So more and more leaders go, you know what? Independence might not be that bad of an idea. Okay. And so then we get to the actual debating, drafting, and signing of the Declaration of Independence in July, starting in mid-June and goes through July, the beginning of July. Okay. Let's get back into our show. So, what's going on before this? Blood being spilled, an attempt at peace, common sense, and then the war is continuing. As they're debating this, as they're deciding to declare independence, the war is continuing. Okay. So, Second Continental Congress reacts to all this and decides, you know what? We need to just draft this thing, designates a five-person committee to draft the Declaration. Jefferson is picked to write it because he is known as a good writer. He's known as a very heavily schooled in the Enlightenment. He's going to make this sound pretty good. It goes through a few drafts. We're going to talk about the first draft because it sets up a really crazy question about the whole declaration. And we need to talk about the philosophical context. The big three of the four big um, Enlightenment ideals: rationalism, make it make sense, natural rights, life, liberty, property, and the social contract. Government power comes from the people, and it must benefit the people. And that if a government abuses its power, the people get to try and change it. That's the social contract. You're going to find all three in big time in the Declaration of Independence, just like we saw it in Common Sense. Okay? And there's one big fella that Jefferson just loves above all else, and that is John Locke. Okay? You're gonna One of those enlightened, the social contract, natural rights is largely talked about and first thought of through John Locke. Okay, Jefferson loved John Locke. He called John Locke one of the three greatest humans to have ever lived. Okay, so he fangirls over John Locke so much. And if you look at it in the Declaration, you have lines that are totally cribbed from John Locke's most famous work, the Second Treatise of Government. Okay, that's produced little less than 100 years before. Jefferson knows it so well. He a little, I mean, he's not plagiarizing. He's it's an homage, I guess. It's a callback, right? If you look at these two quotes, it same theme, same ideas being expressed, and literally he borrows lines. Long train of abuses. Okay, throw off such government. They should rouse themselves and endeavor to put rule in such hands that which may secure them. It's a lot of legalese, but they're basically saying the same thing. Jefferson loved John Locke and he cribbed John Locke. So when you see the Declaration of Independence, you're going to see tons of enlightenment. And you're going to see John Locke just waiting there. Okay. And that's because the Enlightenment is hugely impactful in US history. Okay. One of the things on our very first day that I said to you was that the American Revolution, the Constitution, make is exceptional and unique in world history because we are the very first to take the Enlightenment and make it into a government. Okay? Between the American Revolution, Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution, we are trying to make the Enlightenment work. And in a lot of ways, we have done it. And we've become an example to other countries who do the same. Okay? Yes, I know it's weird that I'm quoting myself as if I am some big important person, but for our purposes, there we go. Okay. So let's actually dive into that text. You're going to follow along in the document. And I'm going to talk a little fast because I know this is going long. So please feel free to slow down what I'm saying so that we can actually get there. Scroll down to, I've got the same things I had in the slide about the key figures right here. So don't worry about it too much because it's already there. Now, if we were to look through the document in your worksheet, it's going to have much of the Declaration of Independence. I cut out a few lines in here. It's going to have much of the text in starting on page 8. Okay, you're going to look and you're going to find lots of examples of the Enlightenment, of callbacks to historical events. Okay, and the Declaration of Independence follows a simple structure. It's going to say this is Hey, are you in here tomorrow? Yeah. Uh, oh shoot. Okay, sorry about that, folks. Slight interruption, but we are okay to go. And if there's an awkward moment when you see me talking to another teacher, that's just I didn't get a chance to delete that part or edit that part out. But that's okay. All right. So, what the Declaration of Independence is going to sound like, or it's going to be structured, if we use the metaphor of the breakup letter, okay, it's going to say, these are my, like, look, we need to break up. That's going to be the intro. And then it's going to say, basically, I'm going to give you just kind of the big ticket reasons why. And then you know what? I'm going to list out all the reasons why you suck and why we should break up. And then I'm going to end it on, so for that reason, we need to break up. Okay. So let's actually look at that and where that dives in. You're going to see enlightenment and you're going to see essentially why they need to do this, why the United States needs to break up with Great Britain. So it starts off the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which connected them together, the separate and equal station to which laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect of opinions, mankind require that they should declare the clauses which impel them to the separation. So it's a lot of language. I know that Jefferson's a little hard to read, okay? He is a little bit pretentious in his writing, but at the time, this was very beautiful writing, and in a lot of ways, it ends up being pretty beautiful writing. But in that, we can find some big ticket things happening. One, we got natural rights. Okay. Laws of nature, nature's God. He's describing the idea that there are these things that we are born with. There are rights that you're born with, and the government has to have a reason to take them away. Otherwise, you have them. Okay. When he calls on nature, when Jefferson, or basically when these leaders are calling on nature, they're saying, these are our rights, and you're denying them, and you don't have the right to. Okay. He goes further and he says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Okay. That's rationalism, folks. That's rationalism. Now, I'm going to briefly skip over this part and talk about the rest before I get to the famous paragraph, because this is the start of the famous paragraph. So let's actually scroll down because at one point he is going to say, prudence will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light or transient causes. Look, it's unwise to change government. We know that. That's hard. Okay. But when the long train of abuses and usurpations, yeah, crib that from John Locke. Okay, pursuing them invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them from under absolute despotism into their right. It is their duty to throw off such government. Okay, so basically, yeah, we know that it's not great to break up if there aren't really good reasons, but you gave us some really good reasons. Okay, we had to break up with you because you were so abusive and tyrannical. Okay, so we're breaking up with you. Right? And then he goes into this long and he says there's this long list. Oh, you want the list? Fine. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. Oh, you want the receipts? You want to know what you did? I'll tell you what you did. That's what's happening right here, okay? And then he lists a bunch of things. And Jefferson says okay, remember, he's referring to King George, but really King George's government under the Parliament. Okay? He says all these different things. He does specific callbacks to very specific events. Okay? He lists for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world. Okay? They do that to Boston. They make a blockade of the city of Boston, one of the most important ports in the colonies. They then, when the colonists protest about this, cut off trade to everybody else, okay, to the other 13 colonies in order to try and starve the rebellion out, okay? Imposes tax without consent. That's taxation without representation, right? That's the original complaint, okay? He is waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coast, burned our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people, right? For a full year, he's been shooting at us. He's been trying to take our guns and he's been trying to take our lives and our freedoms. He's sent more and more soldiers over here to put us down. Okay? That's a callback to the battles of Lexington and Concord, battles of Bunker Hill, and the continuing war that's raging all around the colonies. Okay? They say our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury, right? We have tried to make up. We've tried to do the nice thing and try and find a way through this so that we don't break up. But you know what? You keep making it worse. I offered you a chance to do better, and you made it worse. That's what he's saying here. It's callback to the Olive Branch petition and other attempts to try and find a way through peace. Okay? And the British do reject this. In this, the Americans have a point. Okay? Another moment, we have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their own ideas, right? The Enlightenment was a big deal in Britain before it ever became a big deal here. John Locke's British, right? These are the ideas that are espoused by the British parliamentarians themselves. And yet they're mad that the Americans want the same thing? That's insane, right? Make it make sense. And yet they have come to us to disavow these usurpations, but they have been too tone deaf to voice to the voice of justice and consanguinity, basically living peacefully together. Okay. You know what? We told you what would happen if you push this too far, and you wouldn't listen. Okay. And the colonies, the authority of the people of these colonies solemnly publish and declare that these United Colonies are and of right to be free and ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that the political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. You know what? Yeah, we're breaking up with you. Sorry, not sorry. You brought this on yourself. We're done. You're done. Okay. And then they basically, and yeah, we're going to be free and independent. We're going to fight for that right. And we're done. And you're just going to have to live with it. Okay. Now, I said we go back to the big important line because the big important paragraph that everybody quotes and everyone forgets about all this other stuff that happens in there because everyone thinks about these key lines. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Okay? A lot of people stop at the life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, but there's more, and I think the other line here should be included in what we remember. Okay, deriving from their powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles, organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to effect their safety and happiness. So let's dive in because these are the key lines. This is what makes the Declaration of Independence just go from a complaining breakup letter to actually being this thing that transcends and becomes this higher-minded document. Okay. First off, we see the Enlightenment right here. Self-evident. That's rationalism. When something's self-evident, it means it's obvious. Okay. It means it's inherent. It means it's just there and we know it and assume it and it's real. Okay. That all men are created equal. Okay. There's no difference. Now he means it, and the American signers of the Declaration of Independence mean that there's no difference between Americans, and white British. Okay. We're going to get into the alarm bell you should already be having here. All men are created equal should include more than just white men. But right now, let's think about it in terms of they're talking about white men. Okay. That they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Unalienable means cannot be taken away. That's natural rights, friends. That's natural rights. Unalienable rights are natural rights. Okay. And that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That should be a callback. Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. You should be thinking, wait a minute, wasn't it life, liberty, and property? Because that's what John Locke said. That's what we think of with natural rights, life, liberty, and property. Yeah. Okay. Only reason why it doesn't say property, Jefferson knows that most American colonists at this time do not own property. Or if they do, they don't own a ton of it. Okay. He puts pursuit of happiness in there because he's trying to evoke feelings of wanting independence from more than just the landed elite that own a bunch of property. So it goes from life, liberty, and property as our natural rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. He cribs that directly from John Locke. Social contract is that government exists at the consent of the governed, the permission of the governed. Okay? Meaning the people give their consent to government power. And it is the right, if the government becomes destructive to those ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. He's literally paraphrasing our definition of the social contract right there. Okay. You should see the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is well in this document. Okay. So, yes, it is huge into the social contract. Okay. So, yes, it's a breakup letter, but it is also grounding us in our principles and ideas of freedom and what freedom actually means. Okay. Now, you should already start to think about the big question. That line, all men are created equal. Okay. There's a lot of historians who will say, well, they didn't mean African Americans. You got to think of it. They'll try and couch it. They'll try and make it sound like, contextually, we don't need to think about how this is a contradiction. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. We have to think about it as a contradiction because it was. And people at the time pointed that out. Okay. All men are created what? Equal is what it says. Okay. Now, yes, some of those signers had no qualms signing all men are created equal because in their minds they meant white men. Okay. But that's never going to be enough. That's never going to be enough. And we're going to keep saying, hey, wait a minute, all men are created equal is one of our founding principles. Didn't you mean more than just white men? Isn't that our legacy? Okay. It is an inherent contradiction that our founders, who are talking so much about liberty and freedom, owned slaves. Jefferson among them. Washington too. How can we fight for freedom and liberty but hold millions in bondage? That is an open, good question. How can we today even say we uphold our founding principles but still oppress and deny freedom to some people? Yes, you should ask that question. It is a important question. It is a question that gets asked in many different ways throughout our history, and we should ask it again and over and over today. Okay? Not only when talking about our history, but talking about our present and our future. Okay? It gets even more confusing of why this is included there when you think about what Jefferson's first draft said. Jefferson, a man who owned slaves. Now, I'm not going to have you read through this whole thing, okay? But he literally, at one point, his first draft of the Declaration, one of those grievances is he blames King George for the fact that slavery and the British in general, that slavery is brought to America, right? He says, waged a cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in persons of a distant people who never offended him. He brought, he kidnapped people from Africa, brought them to the United States. They never did anything wrong. Okay? He says it's a infidel powers is a warfare of the Christian king of Great Britain determined to keep open market where men should be bought and sold. Er, But wait. And he calls it an assemblage of horrors. Murder. And then he calls slavery an assemblage of horrors. An assemblage of horrors he's participating in, that Jefferson is participating in. The funny part is he blames the British king for bringing, I mean, King George wasn't actually king at the time in 1619, but you know what? Okay, fine, Jefferson. Go ahead and blame King George. Go ahead and blame the British, except you're the one doing the buying and selling. You and Washington and all those other Southerners are perpetuating the slave system. This is his first draft. He gets talked out of this by Benjamin Franklin and others who say the South, most of the Southerners are not going to sign on to this thing if you include this part because they notice the contradiction. They know, wait, we can't insult the institution of slavery this much because we're participating in it and we fully intend to keep participating in it. It's confusing. Okay. Some historians look and go, well, he was 33 at the time. He was young. This isn't the time, and that maybe he's not thinking it all the way through. Nah, sorry. He owned slaves at that time. He was benefiting from the system. He was smart enough to see the contradiction here. And that's honestly, how do we square it? How do we make this make sense? The short answer is we can't. We can't without knowing Jefferson's mind. But a lot of historians have tried to think it through, and they see Jefferson, the historians that I agree with more, see him as a complicated person, see him as a person who is smart enough to know the contradiction, know the hypocrisy, but still want the benefit. Okay, a lot of people pointed it out at the time. Okay, there is a wonderful letter. At some point, I'll share it with you all by Benjamin Banneker, who is a former slave. He literally writes to Jefferson at one point, says that you, paraphrasing, that you benefited from the Declaration of Independence, that you made it part of your political agenda. You said all men are created equal, and yet you don't include me. Okay. Alexander Hamilton points this out to him multiple times. He uses it as a political cudgel. He uses it as a political weapon, this hypocrisy. Now, some historians, like Ron Chernow, the one who writes the book that Lin-Manuel Miranda makes the musical off of, argues that Hamilton uses it and Hamilton was an abolitionist. Other historians say Hamilton was a political wheeler and dealer who saw Jefferson as a political enemy. And so he uses Sally Hemings and uses Jefferson's contradiction about slavery against him. Not, I go back and forth of whether or not to say it, but it is important to know that people saw this contradiction at the time. Okay. Jefferson was one of our most important founding leaders. We can't think of the United States and what our history, especially with what we're going to talk about in future weeks, without Jefferson. Okay. His ideas are incredibly influential, but he did enslave people and he did take part in preventing them from achieving freedom. Okay. The Declaration of Independence is important, but it's got this contradiction in it. It's there. It's part of our history. When I said that slavery is a pillar that the United States was built on, this is what I'm talking about. And people knew that that sounded weird to talk about liberty and freedom and yet still enslave people. And they came up with all kinds of excuses as to why they should keep it going. We're going to talk a lot about that. Okay. One way to kind of navigate this and think about it, Martin Luther King, he brings it up at one point. He says that there are these ideas that are brought up in our founding by the Declaration and the Constitution, and he thinks of them as a promissory note, or an IOU. Okay, an IOU of freedom. Okay, and that this was a promise to all men. And he says black men and white men. He says that this is, by the way, the I Have a Dream speech. It's not the most quoted part of the I Have a Dream speech, but it's one of my favorite parts of it. Okay, and he quotes the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But he says that the America's failed on that IOU. It's not been paid. It's not paid the bill. It cashed or it sent us a bad check because it has not extended those rights to all people, all its people. Okay. That's one way to think about it. Okay. Because at the end of the day, the Declaration of Independence does have importance. It is part of our legacy. It helps build an American identity. It says basically this is what we stand for. It helps us to build that. Okay. Some of the themes in the Declaration actually get spelled out in more so the Bill of Rights, but it's there. Okay. It places on the path where we could try and get more freedoms and more liberties and more equality. Okay. It doesn't do it by itself, and there's going to be a long history before we actually get there, but it does help us. It gives us something to help build towards by giving us an ideal. It grounds us in the Enlightenment principles and sets up the goals for a new government. Okay. That's where we see the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Okay. In a little more than a decade after the Declaration. And honestly, this is my more complicated legacy, but I do think it is useful. Um, it sets up the future struggles in the United States in terms of defining what freedom is, instead of saying whether or not there should be freedoms. It's a decision about what freedom actually means. When the Civil War happens, okay? You have Abraham Lincoln on one side in the Gettysburg Address. He says 7 years ago. That means 87 years. What happened 87 years before the Gettysburg Address? The signing of the Declaration of Independence. Okay, he calls upon it. It says it defines what freedom is. By this point, The Emancipation Proclamation is signed. He means freedom for all. But the Confederates, the Southerners who had just left the United States, they quote the Declaration too. In their mind, what they mean freedom, they mean states' rights. They mean the right to enslave. They mean the freedom to enslave. Okay? It sets up when you have the struggle for women's right to vote. Okay? For all of women's rights. They quote the Declaration of Independence too. They say that all men are created to be equal means all humans. Okay? We're going to see this over and over again. This Declaration of Independence is our set of ideas. Okay? It's important. It gets quoted. It's part of our very identity. So it's important that we understand it. And we understand it in terms of our goals towards self-government, toward goals towards establishing what freedom means, and actually trying to live it. So, without further ado, that is the Declaration of Independence. Hope you have enjoyed, and let me know if you got questions. Bye bye.